One of the most stressful times for an athlete is when they're injured or when they're coming back from an injury. And we think working with a sports psychologist can really help.
So we thought we'd share with you our top tips that we teach our injured athletes. I'm Matt Shaw.
I'm Bradley Bush.
And this is a Sports Psychologist Breakdown.
It is really good to know that there are two types of athletes. There are athletes who are currently injured and there are athletes who aren't injured yet.
Already this year, we've seen quite a few injuries. So we thought we'd share with you the sort of tips that we might teach our athletes either before they get injured to make sure that they're as robust as possible, during injury to help them cope with some of the challenges, but also after their injury when they've made their recovery and need to start performing again at their best. So what can we do before injury? Well, there's actually a fair amount that we can work on with our athletes. So for example, we know that athletes that are more stressed tend to get injured. And that tends to be because that part of their brain that handles decision making tends to get interrupted or start working in a slightly different way when they are stressed, which sometimes means they get themselves into situations that they shouldn't really be in, and that can cause injury. So a big part of the role when we work with our athletes is to help them manage the stress and manage the noise around them to hopefully mitigate some of those injuries happening.
So if that is how we help our athletes before they get injured, what do we do when they're injured during that injury? We think there are 5 things athletes need to know. Number 1, I think arguably the most important thing an injured athlete can do is accept that they're injured. I think a lot of the stress and frustration and indeed anxiety often comes from athletes wishing they weren't injured. And this gap between perception and reality can be really stressful. But once athletes understand and accept that they're injured, they can then start on coming back fitter, stronger, and better.
So what else can we do to help support our athletes when they are injured? Well, actually, a massive part of recovering from injury that I actually think is really overrated is sleep. Injured athletes need tons of sleep. And in particular, what they're really looking for is deep sleep when their body's recovering. And not only to physically repair what's going on in their body, but they also need the second type of sleep, which is what we call REM sleep, which recovers the brain so that they can start getting their emotions back in check and start focusing on what they need to do as opposed to the fact that they're injured in the first place.
Number 3. I think it's really important that athletes, when they're injured, have the mindset of, can I be the best injured athlete possible? This might not be a fun or glamorous attitude to have, but it's really important because by focusing on being the best injured athlete possible, that leads to them rehabbing and training as effectively as they possibly can.
Tip number 4. Now, we've probably all heard the phrase, education is power. And when it comes to injuries, I think this is really the case. And the reason for that is because the more our athlete knows about how they're injured, what happened, why they're injured, what the knock-on effects might be, but also the ins and outs of their recovery, then often the easier it is for that athlete to buy into their recovery and really commit to some of the behaviours and some of the actions that they need to take going forwards. So tip number 4 would always be try and be as educated as possible about why you got injured and what that means for your recovery.
And finally, I think it's really helpful for athletes to know that often the last month of an injury can actually be the most stressful. Now that might sound counterintuitive because most people think the first month might be the most difficult as that requires the most adaptation. But actually what we tend to see is that last month, because they're so close to regaining their fitness and they know how much work they've had to put in and they feel ready to come back and perform, it's tempting to rush that process, whereas having a bit of patience in that last month can make a massive difference overall.
So what can we do once our athletes made it through their injury and they're back competing again? Well, again, I think there's a few things that are really important. So, for example, having some sort of debrief is really important, where we start to unpack some of the things that have gone well over that period of time. And a question I always ask them is, well, imagine I'm an injured athlete and I'm coming to you for advice. What are the key things you teach me about how to bounce back at my best? Because that way we can start to unpack some of those key behaviours and attitudes that served them so well. And of course, it's important to have some sort of final reality check where I'd be really looking for and asking my athletes to make sure that they're really ready to go. So are you actually ready to compete yet? Or do you just feel like you want to be out there so that there's no more risk of injury or less risk of injury straight away?
So there you have it. That is exactly what we talk to our athletes about before, during and after an injury.
So let us know what you think down in the comments. And of course, if you like the video, give us a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe for more Sports Psychologist breakdowns.